Hello, hello, and welcome to session number 2 of our Women Crush Wednesday session at the Can Diversity Collective's Inkwell Beach Live. We had a very spirited conversation this morning with our Amy, Becky, Karen, Get Your Girl session. And now we have our next session with some ladies that I love and admire. They're just like family to me. It is called the holding company, holding the agencies, holding the industry accountable. And we have leads from each of the holding companies. We have Tiffany Warren with us from OMNICOM. We have Heide Gardner from IPG. And Judy Jackson will be joining us from WPP when we pull her in. But I think it's fair for us to go ahead and get started. We have a lot to talk about. We are in an interesting time right now. I know all of us have been on conversations on Zooms and town hall meetings, leading conversations about what in the world to do. I've heard both of you speak on several panels and you've been giving it to them. And so we hope you can give it to them now. We've had movements starting to happen. There's a 600 and rising organization. And I know we're all being tasked and pulled into different directions. So let's just start by, kind of level setting and kind of letting me know, where are you now? Tiffany, since you're right at the top with me in my screen. You were having you right there?
I know. I was like, are we doing rock, paper, scissors? It's cool. But in terms of where are we now, that's a really big question because I can answer it on multiple levels. Where am I now personally, mentally, and professionally? Clearly.
Give me all three.
I mean, this is Women Crush Wednesday, so you said bring it. But I think from a personal level, obviously, you wake up daily with the anxiety of you just want to make it to 2021. There's this overcast of anxiety around your health, how you present yourself in the world, your family, and your friends. And so you have that layer. In terms of mentally, certainly what's going on in society, it's itself a pandemic. We're looking at, I feel like we're in the middle of twin pandemics. I can never say that word. I think it's my Boston accent. And so, you have that layer. And then professionally, I was thinking about the stats, and my stats in no way, in comparison to Heide and the work that she's, the foundation she's laid for all of us. I would be remiss and not go on any further to say, sort of, I'm on this call because, I was chosen as a most promising student by Heide and the AAF. So the foundation she laid and making history. And then now we're seeing another opportunity to make history and change the future and even the present for not only Black professionals, but people of color. So, on all those levels, imagine putting them all together and having it be embodied by one person. So if I had one word to choose to kind of communicate how I feel, I would say sobering. This last 3 weeks has been sobering. And also, spending 22 years in D&I, half my career at OMNICOM, 1/3 of my life running ad color, I think Heide will agree. I do feel right now like the it girl. All of a sudden people have discovered, what we do. And we've been doing it all along, laying the bricks in the foundation for, organizations and for the community that we see rising up to actually do that unencumbered, to share their voice, to say, this is what we're looking for. So that's probably a long answer to a short question, but I wanted to cover it off on all fronts.
No, give it to us. That's great. Heide. We owe it. We're like, we owe it all to you and Judy Jackson. So we better.
I'm gonna don't know how to quite take that. So one of the things, one of the, I guess, points that you and Tiffany have made is how long I've been at this. Indirectly, I've been at this for a minute. more than a minute. And my work in D&I is the second half of my career. I've actually, I'm starting to own that I have been in this business for over 35 years, almost 40 years. First in the business, and then my transition into this role was quite accidental. It was quite unintentional. This is not the path that I would have chosen for myself at the time, nor a career and desire. So, the idea that I have been at this as long as I have, given sort of what my original intentions and career aspirations is I personally, I think I'm in the right place. It's my journey has been one that I feel has been led, and the idea of, sitting back and saying, where are we, and what have I learned? What have we learned in this moment is, has led me to be in this place where, in terms of our country, or the world or society, I am hopeful, but not necessarily optimistic about whether or not we can together, whether it is as a society, if we're looking at institutions, be they government, policy areas, healthcare, all of those aspects of life, including the corporate sector. Do I believe that we can create a just and equitable world together? I'm hopeful, but I'm not optimistic based on history, right? And from the standpoint of the work that I've been doing all of this time, I don't think our experience as an industry is terribly extraordinary, in that all companies, including those who went far and wide with bureaucratic solutions and, one and done formulaic things of unconscious bias training, and even the best managed institutions, let's say the military, have not been able to get to a place of true, systemic equity. Mm-hmm. And so, having said that, where I am as a person is having, my own experience as a Black woman and as a mother, and I see the people in the industry almost as my children. And I don't mean that in a maternalistic or patronistic way. I feel a sense of obligation to the next generation and to my peers. Yeah. And I want a better life for them, right? Yeah. And I want that opportunity. And at the same time, I am that community. And so all of the experiences that they have are common for me. And so it has been a time, even just going into COVID, of great, great personal despair, right? And what this means in terms of setbacks. I am, the idea that the scabs have been, lifted off, of all the wounds, and there's a level of transparency and honesty, and awakening that we haven't had, since the 1960s. Okay. One of my points is we've been here before.
Yeah.
Many times. And there's a lot to learn from it.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking more from the perspective of me as a person who's lived this, and who is living this, and just sort of where I am as a human being in this space. I'm not, and that is, I think, also informing the path forward in terms of how I contribute to transformation and deeper change within IPG.
Yeah.
So, you touched on a few points. One, you talked about the historical perspective and us being in this space before. I remember when I was coming into the industry, in the 1990s, seems like the 1990s back in the day. But there was a sort of the one that sticks out in my mind from a historical perspective, and I know some work had been done before that, was, when the Katz memo, and I talk a lot about that, when the Katz memo was released, I think in 1998, and that started a whole, movement of symbolic gestures that were being made to make sure that we Black and minority-owned businesses got their fair share of media buys, because Katz had released the memo to tell their salespeople to make sure that they're getting their media buys to attract prospects and not suspects, right? So we had that part, and then we moved a little further to 2008. I think when we had the Cyrus Myrie and all the research that was being done that showed that, not enough women were in senior leadership positions. Pay equity was off, no Black people in leadership positions, and organizations like AdColor and the Center for Excellence in Advertising and the Marcus Graham Project, a lot of those organizations started to pop up, and, more symbolic gestures and money given to us to start initiatives. Thank God many of them are still around, but just because of the fortitude of fighting to keep them there. And then now we're today, in this moment again. So it's like we've gone through moments of, or in 10-year cycles about diversity, inclusion, equity, and now we've moved into that accountability stage, right? So, are we in this accountability state? And we've seen it all before. We've gone through these movements before.
Yeah, I want to speak to that from a historical perspective a little bit, because my work with AAF when I started their diversity efforts were actually the first few years that was a pipeline thing, which was led by, let me say this, Black agencies and media were the ones who seeded, funded, and held AAF accountable for establishing diversity initiatives. All right. I want that to be made clear. We owe them that legacy. And but to your point, the issues that really grabbed the attention of the industry and the engagement of the top leadership was, frankly, the regulatory environment, where because of the Katz memo and various business practices, the federal agencies and the Clinton administration were looking at regulation and other kinds of accountabilities around business practices. And what happened as a consequence is something that I want to say is that one of the things that I felt that was the most important, if people say, what did you work toward that, that you felt was really meaningful, was as a lobbyist, working together with the industry and the administration toward contracting class practices and an executive order signed in the Oval Office that mandated spending levels with media, minority media, and so on. And that was kind of the platform for launching a lot of the other initiatives once people came together. Are we in a new era? I think that again, we've seen this before. And people will notice, and I say this in my partnerships with many of the organizations like 600 and Rising, sort of behind the scenes. I am loath to be signing on to, you know, initiatives and movements because I've been there before. Mm-hmm. All right. I've been there for Operation Success. I've been there, you know, which you know, were these moments. I'm more concerned about what we do internally, you know, in terms of, and using the knowledge that we have about what has and hasn't worked, right? Yeah. And so, and I think the kind of accountability that I'm looking for and working toward within IPG is more around informed hypotheses for specific actions using design thinking and having everyone at the table to solve the problems, right? And measuring in a shorter time frame to see what is working and scaling. I am with Dr. Janice Eberhardt out of Stanford, who's been warning people about this move to show decisive action and that we're doing something, but going with a lot of unproven strategies and interventions. And most of the strategies and interventions have not proven to yield results. And the best, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to shut up because I'm talking too much. But the other thing is I'm familiar with the work of many companies with deep pockets who have invested in bringing neuroscientists and social scientists and organizational psychologists in to develop, these solutions using technology and, getting people to make better decisions and disrupt buying. They spent millions, and those same people, those same companies are in the same boat we are with their, Black and Indigenous people of color, meaning we have a lot of work to do and a lot of innovation and a lot of intention that we have to apply.
Wow, that was a lot.
I'm going to shut up now.
No, but it was and it was good.
Like a co-moderator. I'm just here like listening. What you're setting the stage for, and what I think, is very, very clear is that the historical analysis of what worked before, when you think you're making history, you might repeat it. It's really important to lay that foundation. So please never stop talking.
Yeah.
Because, anytime I listen to you, it really reminds me of like, we are stewards of a certain part of the timeline, and we make it stronger for the next generation of stewards. And so we're seeing that next generation rise and come up in the agencies and the holding companies. And, what you talked about, I think it's just really important, because often when I have these conversations, people will say, this is new, right? And I'm like, so to your point, Adrianne, when you spoke about the Katz memo and Cyrus Miri and, Heide, your idea about design thinking and looking at industries where the same initiatives that we are applying over and over again that are not working haven't worked in multiple industries. Yeah. So you have to rethink.
Yeah.
And come at it from an organizational behavior, in innovation, because innovation is not often associated with DE&I.
Yeah, and I don't think that bureaucracy, you can't process and train your way out of this. especially in our industry, where we are so decentralized. And if you're looking at it from a holding company perspective, we're companies within companies within companies, with offices, within teams, and then you've got individuals where a lot of the decision making and the day to day is not at all going about the process, right?
Right.
It's about how the decisions are made and how the interactions happen, and whether or not the environment, meaning the values and the beliefs and the behaviors and the intentions of the processes, are going to, do what's needed to be done. But again, what has happened is that once and this is, I'm purely talking U.S.
Yeah.
Once we had the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Title VII,
yeah,
there was progress using bureaucratic kinds of solutions, because companies invented all of these systems to prove that they were not discriminating. That improvement stopped in the 80s when the government focus changed and when the culture started to change, right? And it was about it was about eliminating regulation, and it was also about the beginnings of, I think, where we are now in terms of pathologizing and Black and brown people and people who were at the margins, and you saw the whole affirmative action and equal opportunity. You saw a pivot to this idea around diversity and inclusion, and the idea of let's do this for business reasons. So flashing, and since then we have seen certain types of progress, but by and large workplaces are not, the white women did okay. We've seen, some progress for some groups where Black and Indigenous people are left behind. But flashing forward, I'm in work groups with companies from a number of different industries who are looking at workplace education, recovery, and so on.
Yeah.
And in one of those conversations, it had to do with D&I, that was led by McKinsey.
Oh, yeah.
It was so it was led by McKinsey, and there was this, and the question is what should CEOs, chief executives be advised? And there was a woman who stood up and she said, look, let's just be honest here. If the business case for diversity was going to have an impact or was, really meaningful in general, we would not be here having this conversation.
Yeah.
And, the pivoting to what I will say is, we would not be having this conversation and looking at forecasts if everything remained the same. We're 200 years away on gender equity. If you're looking up and down the pipeline, we're 200 years away from racial, and other forms of equity. And I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
So Judy is in.
Hey.
Judy Jackson has made it to the stage.
My day's over. I'm done.
You can do the closing remarks. No,
right. You're coming around. So Judy, we were.
Thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for being partners. Thank you for the love that you give each other, everyone else, me, and thank you for the journey you've been on.
Yes, we just went through a little bit of that journey, and we provided some really great historical perspective where we've been, and then we're in that accountability stage right now. I think we all agree on what do we do. We've laid this full foundation. People have been, the policies have been laid, the papers have been written, but yet and still, we are still here. So what are we doing now? Where are we now? How are you feeling now, Judy Jackson, about the state of inclusion and diversity in 2020 and all the other stuff that's happening? That's the question that's being posed to you right now.
Well, it's funny. The other day, someone asked me, was I feeling hopeful? And I said, I've always been feeling hopeful.
Yeah.
Right? We've always been hopeful. But for the first time in a long time, I feel powerful. I feel that I have access and the ability to make those change. Candidly, and this should not be a surprise to my buddy Heide, candidly, I'm at a stage where I was thinking, I think I need to find a beach. Pass it along. This is, while we're going through COVID, and I just said, I don't know. Daughter's going off to college. And then all of this happened, and our focus on anti-racism. Yeah. And I don't know how Heide might have felt, and I say Heide because I know how long she's been on this journey. I just got this renewed zest and sense of strength and sense of commitment and power. And Heide, I say go to you a lot because I know in other calls you said, use your spheres of influence. And I've encouraged my team, others I know to do the same. The first time I feel completely in charge of myself, in charge of a destiny, and I feel powerful. And I've not felt that in a very long time.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, well, okay. So one of the, one of the, I guess the blessing when I said of having hindsight and I'm going to speak from my experience within IPG, is that we've been at this for a long time and have a lot of data, right? Yeah. And we have, and I mean all kinds of data, from cultural data to workforce data to, because we've had reporting and formal accountability, at least at the top of the house across our enterprise. We have the benefit of a lot of hindsight, and I have a tremendous partnership and support from the board and Michael Roth and Philippe Kowski, everyone as a member of that senior leadership team. And so going into 2020, we had done a pretty robust look where I have a board who's like, this is better, but this is not, good enough. And so we were rebooting and retooling going into this. So so my staff, for instance, has almost doubled going into this. And the last person that was hired actually started 4 days before we went home, in this environment. And so, and so we, so I, in terms of having a shot at improving the outcomes, between having the investment in the tank team, technology infrastructure, analytics, the research initiatives that we help sponsor on Black talent and on a lot of others, studies, the rebooting of our CEOs and leadership and the accountability there, and some of the other things that we were doing, I felt well positioned. And then COVID happened, right? And what COVID did was elevate the need for the work that we do, and we were able to contribute early on toward the mitigating the equity and issues to some extent, and so, but what has happened now is what the challenge for me is about we have to do a lot smarter. We're going to tackle systemic issues. We have to do that in a systemic way. In terms of the accountability, how do you do that with multiple layers? How do you measure, right? And then how do we move quickly enough to tend to the urgent needs, pain, and very, and I think also knowing that everybody doesn't think we should be talking about this stuff at work, right? Everyone is not on board that there are problems. Everyone doesn't agree, including people of color, including some, Black people. So you also have to factor in, how do you bring people along knowing that everyone is not on board?
Well, you know what? I think Adrianne, I'm lucky that I have Adrianne on my team. And Adrianne and I often, and the team, we often talk about, people that might be, or things in systems that are barriers to success. And Adrianne, what is your answer to that? Purge!
I'm all about purging the system. Absolutely.
And what I love about the team because for us, Heide, I've worked with at IPG and worked with you, and your passion and commitment. What I love about the team that we're building at WPP, which is all new, is that Adrianne, Kai, others on my team that are just joining, they don't know the word no yet. They haven't been birthed by corporate America. Kai Lawson's first month with me, I think she was like shell shocked. Like, you can't just do stuff.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of it, because they're breaking the rules. And in terms about talking, because we're doing such, and I know you are too, having a lot of safe room sessions, and having our CEO actively on these safe room conversations, looking at the chat and seeing white people ask questions that they would have never asked before. The conversations are something I've never heard in my 30 plus years in this business. And it is different. And I do think that, we are now looking at what are the systems that need to break. And, I talked to one of the brands over the weekend about something, and they said, one of our big agencies brands, and said, this is the way we did things. And so this is a problem. And I said to them, but you've been doing that for so long, and what success did you get on that? So let's just break that. Let's just break it. And I do think there needs to be a new group of people that come on board. I'm hoping, that we all hire that are not afraid, that are bold, and are able to break things. Be they leaders or people in the D&I, or inclusion and diversity space. I am lucky that, Jackie Canning, who's from Walmart, is our chief people officer globally. Jackie likes to break shit. And she works for Mark Reed, who I've loved and adored. When I was at Wonderman, he brought me over. He's not necessarily a fan of breaking shit, but he's a fan of change, and he's a fan of trusting the people he puts in charge. So again, I hope, Adrianne could vouch for this. Our journey is not as broad as yours has been. We've been a company that's been led by brands, not by WPP. But I'm looking forward to breaking stuff. And I'm looking forward to us doing something different in terms of Heide, Tiffany, Judy, and breaking stuff together.
Yes. And I would also add,
us crossing out of those. I'm sorry, you're gonna go. It crossed over our, and we've been talking about it a little bit at ColorCon, Tiffany. Like, would we be willing to come together, at least for Black people, come together, hold hands, and say, you know what, we're gonna do like we did on, I'm dating myself, Miracle of 34th Street. If we have it here at WPP, they may have it over there at OMNICOM. So Black person, I'm sending you over to OMNICOM because this might be this great marketing role over there. And Heide, we don't have this whatever promotion opportunity or what you're looking for at X, but you know what? Ogilvy might at WPP, let me send you over there. Like, could we hold hands and say, we're going to make a difference for Black people in this industry, not just in the holding companies we represent?
Well, I think that what is happening now that is different is there is infrastructure being built by and for people of color where there will be the critical masses of talent and databases that consolidate that. So we've seen Black creatives, and we see what 600 and rising, and looking at ad color, and looking also at AAF was doing some things with getting with consolidating things. And I think that a lot of that infrastructure I appreciate will can systematize that mobility around, and that will not make progress dependent on who might be running a holding company or an agency. If, meanwhile, I know what I'm trying to do is, with this pivot, is really look at deeply embedded DNA that is consistent, like across the enterprise. I think that the informal connections and just even building those communities, I kind of feel that those things have been happening on an informal basis.
Yeah, I think it has been happening on an informal basis. I know we all do it informally. I'm talking about making it, and this is something to talk about offline, but I'm talking about making it part of our mindset, part of our DNA, and a system that goes behind it.
Right.
We be so bold to recognize that we are all at some point engaging in the same people. And at some point, take a community, our Black community, and say, you know what? We are for you first.
Yeah.
And for you in the industry first. And we're going to sign up to do it boldly, not just haphazardly.
Yeah. Right.
And we're going to be generous enough with your career to make you a success wherever you are in this business, not just at WPP. That's new for WPP to think that broadly. And I'm talking about a mindset. To start there versus where we've been is I want to hold on to these people.
Yeah, I think I totally agree that we need a unified approach to retaining and developing the leadership pipeline and ensuring opportunity and mobility, across the agencies. I think that I totally agree. Is collaborative. I just worry what my concern about the institutional infrastructure that we have in this industry, which is trade groups or nonprofits, and now there are social enterprises, right, for-profit enterprises. Is making sure that there is a way to institutionalize this, right? And I think that we need to support that infrastructure that is by and for people of color, or Black and Indigenous people of color, and not vulnerable to whatever issue du jour or priority someone who's leading a trade group, and we all know how that works, so that it can live and exist independent of us.
Oh, no, I agree.
You know what I mean?
Tiffany, I know Tiffany's been dying to say something here.
No, I'm not dying. I'm like, I'm in school right now. So, I know when I'm in the presence, of greatness. And so it's important that what Heide is communicating and what you're communicating, gets out there. So I defer. But no, I was saying, like, in terms of these databases, what I've seen is a commoditization of diversity and inclusion. Because when I was coming up, there was altruism, there was a direct impact on people of color. I was a beneficiary of that. And then somewhere along the line, within like the last, I would say 6 or 8 years, there's been a value placed on talent of color, but not led by talent of color. I'm trying to be like as not general, but I'm trying to be kind. And so when you're, as a Black woman leading an organization, and certainly trying to close the recognition gap, because I think we all have roads that are leading to equity. We all are doing something different. And then there's things that we're doing the same. Your idea about coming together, I literally get called every other day about a coalition, every other day. And it's not by people of color. And so I think, to your point, it's a rallying call to the industry for those organizations of color who have maintained really incredible, not only share of mind, but are doing things to close whatever gap that is. Recognition, before AdColor, before ColorCom, you would look at industry events and you just wouldn't see us. You would look at these power lists and you wouldn't see us. Or they would honor the same people, so in that
over and over
again. And so in that time, and I'm very clear what my lane is in terms of AdColor, it's that recognition gap, and that's building a community, almost an industry ERG, because we didn't have that internally at some of the companies. Because often the reason why AdColor feels the way it does is because it's a collection of people who are one of two, one of three, one of none that are coming together. But I just want to highlight the point that the calls that I'm getting are not necessarily from my, and I can extend the call as well. I've always had an open door policy. I almost, I did something a long time ago where I brought together everyone who dealt with D&I to have the conversation, but we couldn't get out of our own way. And I think we just have to be honest about.
I remember those days.
Yeah. I mean, but we have to be honest. If the end game is to make sure that there's mobility, there's retention, there's promotion for Black professionals, and then, but also people of color, then we have to come in a room and say, okay, we each have something really unique and special. Collaboratively, what can we do, to your point, Judy, to put the career first, to put the mobility first, to put the retention first. And each of us are doing one thing, there's always a burden on each of us. And I don't know if you guys feel this. And Judy, I appreciate when you said that you feel more powerful now. I actually would add to that, I don't feel lonely anymore. Because often when you're in the position of CDO, and I'm obviously, a bit younger, but not by much. But in terms of what I felt was I had to be crisis manager, counselor in chief, PR, comms, head of internships, HR, and we have to look at the mechanics of what is expected of the role. And I know Heide has done a lot of work to say, there needs to be a collaborative team, as you talked about the work groups that you're a part of. But one thing I hope is this process unearths what it really takes to do not only this role, but to make the changes. Because, Heide, you put it so eloquently early, we haven't solved it for society. We haven't solved it for society. And now there's an opening and we feel hopeful. But if we're not, like, if it's not being solved for society, if there are systems systems and people that are put in place to keep those systems in place. I'm not being negative, but I'm going to echo. I'm in between you with the powerful and the optimism, with the not optimistic.
Yeah, I want to,
keeping it moving.
Yeah, I want to speak to that. And so, going back to where I was talking about being hopeful but not optimistic. What at this point, or companies are the most diverse institutions we have.
Right.
People don't live together, work together, go to school together. If they go to school together, they're not eating lunch and hanging out together.
Right.
And we don't have, diversity. Most professional networks are not diverse. The community, friendships, and so on. And we have, what I'm going to say is an ignorant society, where we're dealing with, media consumption driven by our values and our beliefs, and lots of misinformation and lots of, belief systems, and that I believe that companies have the most potential.
Yes, agreed.
Because of their resources, their influence, where they can invest in equity. And there are, in terms of outward things like closing on election dates.
Yeah.
And making sure your people can get to the polls.
Agreed.
There, if you want to talk about that, influencing policy and legislation. Internally, doing the work that is necessary, and that's what where I get concerned about what's happening now. Mm-hmm. And that is a rush to focus outward and invest and support all of the, the outward. And then even if we're talking about building or collaboration across the organizations that are led by people of color, for people of color, is that we still have to deal with having equity and inclusion and justice embedded in everything we do.
Yeah, agreed.
Absolutely. That's why we're breaking down walls.
Yeah.
That's why we're breaking things the way they were. That's why we're redoing them. And that's why, to Adrianne's point, we're purging.
Well, Adrianne, I want to say.
I think now is a time to be bold and to think very, very differently. Yeah. And I am incredibly, and call me Pollyanna, but I am incredibly optimistic. I went through a whole 180 of, where's that beach? To ain't no beach, honey. I'm working.
You ain't got time. Yeah, I was like, you ain't got time.
Because I don't know how long this revolution is supposed to last, but I will say it is televised. Yeah. So, and we can't. And I won't leave the idea of, and again, starting with the mindset that I wish for us to have, and this is what the ask I had of Adrianne for us to just mention, the mindset that I ask for us all to have, and that's not just us in this call, but that we own or responsible for our rising talent, our rising Black talent.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a biased point of view. And it's probably not going to be the most popular point of view, but I am asking all of us, my CEO, as well as our people involved in this race, to commit to the career development and advancement of Black people, even if it's not within your company or holding organization, and that it is done boldly and overtly, because we have not been successful in doing what we've always done. We are transferring back and forth the same talent. Yes, in the meantime, we are looking at our systems and changing them. We're looking at our people and educating them. Yeah. And on a post that I just responded to this morning on LinkedIn, I posted something about this journey. And a person, I can't necessarily know their race or not, but a person wrote back around something about, I don't understand why Black people are whining, so to speak. Those weren't their words, but it was sort of that kind of thing, you know? I mean, other people succeed, why can't they? Blah, 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 blah. So someone else responded and said, you know, at Judy, are you going to respond to this post? Because they're responding to something I posted. And I wrote, I choose to spend my time with people who care, with people who want to make a change, because I will be wasting my breath with people who don't. Absolutely. So for those who can't come along for the ride, I'd say, see you later. I say to Adrianne's point, we might need to have you purged. But that said, I want to spend my time with people who want to make a change. I want to spend my time with people who may not know how, may not know what, but care. For those who don't, I don't have time. And I'm not going to spend my time there.
I want to piggyback in terms of sort of I think there are some principles around collaboration and support and how you enhance equity for Black and Indigenous people of color. That there is no, I am opposed to anything that is designed to fix people who do not need fixing. I do not. The idea that the problem is some sort of diminished efficacy or in terms of self-confidence or capability or capacity, or that they need something special. Correct. Is not the issue. And I think there's a point where you have to say, if this is happening consistently, unless someone wants to decide that, yes, there is something pathologically unequal, that is creating this value gap and this opportunity gap, then we have to be very careful about what we decide it means to be investing and supporting change and mobility. And anybody that comes to me with, we got a special this or that, and we're gonna dust up these women and people of color and shine them and polish them and keep them have a talk and not be, perceived as angry and overly aggressive and, respectable and, to be heard. No.
Right. And I know we have to end soon, but I think that embracing people's authenticity is helping and probably will help. I think the education people are getting will help. And I think even all of us, whether we're allies or people of color, being free to speak up, being able to free when you see an injury. Because I think in the past we've been polite and quiet. I believe we are feeling more powerful to share our voice. And when we are in the rooms and where we have influence, to use those rooms of influence. Yeah. So I do see that corner turning.
I know that we have a few minutes and I actually have to run soon, but I just want to acknowledge, I've been sort of looking at the comments, but there's so many great breakers and disruptors who've been following the conversation. So I just want to shout out Love Malone, Pepper Miller, Simeon Coker, who have been involved in this conversation, Daphne Leroy. There's so many breakers out there in the world. And, I think we just have to come together and, be collaborative in that. But, there's the thing that I've learned the most in my time within this industry is, people, this is, when people say it's a marathon, I think what people hear is you're not doing anything. And so we have to figure out a messaging or a languaging to give people hope, because that's what I'm seeing, in comments and feedback, that they want to feel and be touched by the hope that we have in our individual organizations. So Judy, I'm signing myself up to anything that you are doing, even if it's a quarterly check-in with each other. COVID has separated us and we haven't been able to see each other. So, whatever we can do to come together in the sisterhood that was started and created, by Heide, sign me up.
Thank you.
Oh,
Adrianne, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
My doorbell rang, so I had to. Again, I'm like, why am I getting deliveries during these sessions? So, but I was going to say, Tiffany, thanks for co-hosting between Auntie Heide and Auntie Judy for this kind of, because we've been like,
that is one thing my mom taught me. Just know your place in the presence.
Just know. But yeah, exactly. But Judy and Heide, I know you guys can stay like a few minutes longer just to keep the conversation going, because I think people still want to hear and really want answers to the question of, yes, this journey has been going on, but there's been a cosmic shift almost right now. And there's there's an active watching audience that need and want to move forward. My bad word is future. I always say that I don't believe in the future. I believe in being forward focused, because we don't know what's going to happen. We just had COVID. We've been going through this endemic of racism all of this time. So what are we doing now? Like, what's the action now that we're doing with goals and aspirations? But there has to be something intentional done now. And, we always say, I'll quote everything Judy says about, we never let a good crisis go to waste, right? So we're in crisis mode, and we don't know how long this window, these symbolic gestures are going to be thrown our way. And I think people want to know from the holding companies and how we're holding people accountable. Like, we're leaders in this space in D&I, and they're like, what are the D&I leaders doing? Yeah. What are we going to do? How are we going to make all of the work that, that Tiffany shouted out, the people in the comments and the 600 and rising, they're like ready to do something. How can we contribute to that?
Well, I can speak. So as I said, we've been at this a long time, and we've got a lot of rich data about the rest of the world, about our sector, about our industry, as up until the point that was no longer available, and of course about ourselves. And so we 3 years ago were focused on not doing as well as we wanted to in an intersectional way, disaggregating the data and looking at specifically Black people. So we've been at this for 3 years. In the last few years, the formal goals that agencies had looked at relative turnover, holding them accountable through, for turnover rates, looking at promotions, looking internally at, how our agencies collaborate to keep people within the system, representation, promotions, all of those kinds of, workforce related things. And then in terms of the goals that we set for survey results, we also basically, looking across the enterprise, saw who's, the goal was, how do we focus on the experience specifically of Black people, right? And that was what they were being held accountable for, because those were the greatest areas of improvement. So we were doing that coming into this, right? And looking at, again, rebuilding the team and looking at accountability and scaling and yada, 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 yada. And now where we are is, and what Michael has explained and tasked me and the CEOs with, is we weren't going with the accountability was not deep enough. The focus, I think, on interventions and what I want to say that have to work in a decentralized way wasn't where it could be. And so, that is part of why I'm hopeful, because we have in place the systems and that we're working on to look at very discrete, and using models, right, that for change and for measurement that will create a kind of accountability for results with what you do. And as opposed to just having a programmatic approach, down to the office level. The other thing is we're part of doing that means incorporating the very specifically the transparency, the accountability, the partnership, and living up to what we have committed to do to the 600, right? And what we have committed to do in the UK as well.
Great. Judy, were you gonna?
Wasn't sure where to start. I guess I would say from a WPP standpoint, this journey for us is new. Our brands have, the Ogilvy's and Wonderman's, where I was from, so forth, had their journeys and their progress. But WPP didn't look at ourselves. We didn't look at ourselves as a company until 2019. These were all independent brands that reported on their revenue, their growth or lack thereof. And but here's the opportunity. The opportunity for us when Mark Reed came on board just 18 months ago as our CEO for WPP, and I came with him, is to reinvent WPP. So we started with the excuse, in a sense, that we are going to be different. We didn't even have values at WPP until Mark came on board, which are open, optimistic, and extraordinary. We didn't have a true center. We didn't have a global head of culture or a global head of inclusion and diversity. And our first global head of inclusion and diversity has been with us for 6 months or so, and she's right here, Adrianne. So the good news is we brought in a whole new team for Mark's leadership team or Jackie Canny and her talent organization. We're working with the premise that inclusion, and we started with inclusion and diversity versus diversity and inclusion, because personally it's my belief that you can't maintain diversity unless you have an inclusive organization where people feel they belong. So our focus first is on creating that home that people want to come to, and then once they come, they'll want to stay. The other premise is that inclusion and diversity cannot be in a silo. So the team that we're building, which I don't know, now we started with 2 18 months ago, myself and Corey Stevens, and now we have about 9 maybe in our team, and growing, and that's in the last 18 months. We're focused on not being in our silos. So my team members are working with the brands, helping them partner with their CEOs and build their inclusive and diversity agenda. They are working with the core HR teams that run compensation, that are building our performance management systems. They're sitting at the table, Yashika Olden, one of them, sitting at the table with them as part of the team, not as let me go meet with you and show you inclusion and diversity or culture team, what we're doing. We're there building together. The premise is that if we are not part of the initial planning and programming of our systematic processes, it will not be sustainable. So I'm lucky that we are building a new house. And in this new house, we can decide what belongs in that new house versus coming into an existing structure. So that's where our efforts have been in building. The one thing that I feel has helped us the most has been listening, whether it's the safe rooms or the small safe rooms, and having our leaders, many of which are not from the US, hear things that they've never heard before, listen to content that they've never heard before, understanding why racism exists in America and where it began. And it was probably a little ignorant on my part to assume that people understood our story. But because people are home through COVID and have to listen, they're listening differently. And I think once you listen differently, you will likely act differently. So for us, it's a new journey. But I think that's what makes it even more powerful.
Yeah. And I really think what sort of the common thread between all of the, the pieces of the holding companies that I've heard is that there definitely has to be this global, I use the term global consistency or the head consistency, but identifying that each of our individual brands, there's a different culture, different flavor, but we have to have the same standards and consistency in order to make it work for our individual brands and agencies within our network. And the idea is to make sure those core values stay in place and that everybody's on the action plan. Just it's not enough for the heads to have the identity and the mission, but circulating it through the fabric of the organization where there may be the disconnect for us. Is it in HR where the disconnect is? Is it in the hiring managers where the disconnect is? Is it in the recruiters? We just know that we've done the policy work, we've done the paperwork, the legwork for decades, but still there's that disconnect that we have to fix. And I think the work that I'm hearing from WPP and IPG and OMNICOM is that the goal is to weave our issues, these inclusion and diversity issues, through every sector of our agencies, whether it's strategy, whether it's, accounting, every department, it has to be worked through the organization. So we're not siloed. The I&D budget is not the first budget that's cut. I'm sure when COVID hit, everybody was like, what do we do now? Because we know I&D gets cut first. But for lack of another crisis happened that allowed everyone to see the importance and value of inclusion and diversity in the people in these positions. And, the benefit of when the movement happens, a moment happens, it creates a movement for us to act and do differently and make some sustainable change. I'm hoping that's what this creates. We have 2 minutes, ladies. Can we have so much good stuff. Can we do it in 2 minutes? Heide.
I would say that in terms of what is coming out of this moment, that is, I think, wind at our backs, and that can be leveraged, is the idea of equity. And equity is about inputs, outputs, and is measurable. And it is, and the idea that part of what we have to do as a society and a culture and as institutions, whether we're in educational institutions, medical institutions, or commercial institutions, is we have to embed equity into everything that we do. And the other part of it is that equity and brand, ideals need to be embedded in everything that a company does in terms of its brand purposes and what everyone says they now are, which is social enterprises, right? Who are beholden to more than their shareholders and their owners. And to me, that is the big upside. Equity can give us much more structure and focus to drive change.
Great. And Judy, last
quickly,
word.
We all have a responsibility in this war.
Yeah.
And so let's all take up a mantle and find out where's our sphere of influence and own it. Own your voice. Know that your voice can be heard. Use it. Be bold to do that. And let's keep this conversation going.
All right. Heide and Judy, thank you so much. You ladies are my sheroes. I'm inspired by both of you. You help me to live and embody that motto of don't talk about it, be about it.
You're very kind.
We will work hard. I will work hard to make sure that this moment is more than this moment is a movement, and that we are effectuating some sustainable change.
Love you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.